Jordan, thank you for taking my call. Father Brancich, thank you, and God bless you. I'm getting my husband warmed up to the Latin Mass. We went Sunday to a Latin church in Joliet, Ohio. They had the 1962 Missal, and after a bit of fits and starts, I finally figured it out. And what I wanted to know was what Missal St. Stanislaus uses so that I can figure out where I'm going here, because I think if my husband wasn't so lost, he'd be much more open to attending the Latin Mass on a more regular basis. Thank you. That's my question.
I really appreciate your question, Sharon, and I'm so happy that you're open to trying out the Latin Mass. It can be scary and daunting, and there's different reactions. The first time I saw and went to a traditional Latin Mass, it was love at first sight. I loved it. I hadn't really known about it. And once I found out about it, I said, this is where I always want to go. Other people go and they say, did I go to Mass? Was that Catholic? Do I need to go to confession? These are all things that people have told me about their first experiences with the traditional Latin Mass. And I always tell people, don't be afraid. The traditional Latin Mass has been around for centuries. Parts of the traditional Latin Mass go back really almost to the apostolic times. And it was the, shall we say, the official Roman rite of the church since the Council of Trent. But even before that, it wasn't invented at the Council of Trent. It was already existing. And that's why that was chosen as the rite when they're looking at what would be sort of the central rite. That was the one that was also being used in Rome. So it's got a long pedigree. I tell people, go to the Latin Mass. Don't try to follow along the first time you go. In fact, don't even really go with a decision, shall we say, after your first Mass. Now, I've always told people, because this is what people told me 10, 15 years ago. They said, Father, I didn't like the Latin Mass, or I wasn't used to it, or I didn't really know what to think of it until I went for 5 times. He said the first 4 times were sort of tough, and then the 5th time, something sort of like was lifted off my eyes, and I got it. Now, I've heard people say, you got to go 3 times. Somebody says you got to go 4 times, but I'm going to stick with the traditional 5 times. That's what I was always told by people that were not necessarily excited about it at first. And I think we go in a lot of times with preconceived notions because we've been told that this is how you have to go to Mass. This is what is expected of you. And sometimes that maybe isn't even necessarily helpful. So I tell people, go and don't try to follow along. The reason that we go to Mass is because God wants to be worshiped. And he's told us how he likes to be worshiped. In the Old Testament, he told the Israelites that he liked to be worshiped with psalms and with hymns and with sacrifices. And even today, through the church, Christ has founded the church, and the church guides us to know how God wants to be worshiped. And so our job is to go worship God and to pray. The definition of prayer is the lifting of the mind and heart to God. That can be done in many ways. You don't have to be following along with every word that the priest is saying in order to pray. You can go in and let's take a high Mass in the traditional rite. You've got the choir singing, perhaps Gregorian chant. You have beautiful vestments. You have ceremony. You have incense going into your nostrils. You might receive Holy Communion. That's a taste on your tongue. So all of these things help to lift our mind and heart to God. God is really smart. He knows how he designed us, and he knows that everything that we learn is through our senses. And so the going to the traditional Latin Mass and let your senses sort of pull your mind and heart can bring you into a great amount of prayer. And that's absolutely participating at Mass by connecting your heart and your mind to what's going on at the altar. So that's my advice. I would definitely recommend getting a good missal, because if you're going to go for more than 5 times, and if you go 5 times, I think you are going to go more than 5 times, then you do want to start following along, because the prayers the readings which change the gospel, the epistle, they're so beautiful. They are so clearly expressing our faith. They are spiritual food. They are inspirational. And so I think you will want to start participating by reading at least some of the translation. So you asked, what missal do we use at St. Stanislaus? Well, I would say most of the groups that have been given the use of the traditional Mass by the Church have been given the 1962 missal. So that's what the Fraternity of St. Peter in our founding documents and our constitutions, given by Rome, approved by Rome, give us the missal of 1962. And when Summorum Pontificum came out back in 2007, giving priests the permission to say the traditional Mass, it also mentioned the 1962 missal. So I think that would be a good investment, because almost anywhere you go for the traditional Mass, they would be using that 1962 missal.